The sun hung like a beaten gold coin in the dusty Arizona sky, as Josephine Taylor trudged along the dry road leading into Chloride. Her wrists were raw from the rope that had bound them for days, and beneath the collar of her tattered dress lay the mark that had become her identity, a crude brand seared into her shoulder blade, marking her as property. 3 months ago, she'd been a free woman with dreams. Now, at 23, she was merchandise, sold to the highest bidder by men whose faces she tried daily to forget. Josephine kept her eyes fixed on the mining town ahead. Chloride had sprung up with the silver boom of the 1870s, and by 1881, it had transformed from a collection of tents to a proper settlement with wooden buildings, a general store, and at least 2 saloons whose raucous music carried even now on the hot breeze. Her destination was the Golden Nugget, where her new owner was waiting, a man she'd only heard described as having a temper as volatile as the dynamite used in the mines. The thought of what awaited her made Josephine's steps falter. She reached up to touch the tender skin around her brand, wincing at the still-healing wound. The mark wasn't visible to others, deliberately placed where it could be hidden, but she felt its presence constantly, like a weight pressing against her spine. "Keep moving," growled the bearded man escorting her, giving her a rough shove that nearly sent her sprawling into the dust. "Paid good money for you, and Tucker's waiting." Josephine stumbled forward, her legs weak from days of minimal food and water. The main street of Chloride stretched before her, surprisingly busy for midday. Miners in dirt-caked clothes mingled with merchants and townspeople going about their business. A few women in calico dresses hurried past, their gazes sliding away from Josephine's disheveled appearance. The man gripped her arm tightly, steering her toward the saloon. The Golden Nugget's swinging doors were propped open in concession to the oppressive heat, and the sound of a poorly tuned piano spilled out into the street along with the smell of whiskey and sweat. Before they could reach the entrance, a commotion erupted from the alley beside the saloon. A man came crashing backward through a side door, landing hard in the dust. Another man followed, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim interior. "I told you, Hartley, I won't be cheated." The voice was low and steady, but carried an unmistakable thread of danger. "Take your marked cards and get out of my town." The man in the dust scrambled to his feet, his hand hovering near his holster. "You'll regret this, Dawson." "I doubt that." The tall man stepped fully into the sunlight. Josephine caught her breath. He stood over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, tough build of someone who'd spent his life working outdoors. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath a well-worn Stetson, and his eyes, a startling clear blue, were fixed on the man he'd just ejected from the saloon. Those eyes flickered briefly to Josephine, then to the man gripping her arm. Something in his expression shifted, hardened. "You bringing trouble to my town, Silas?" he asked, directing the question to Josephine's escort. "Mind your business, Dawson," Silas spat. "Just delivering what Tucker purchased." The tall man's gaze returned to Josephine, taking in her exhausted state, the bruises on her arms, the hollow fear in her eyes. Understanding dawned on his face, followed by something that looked remarkably like fury. "Tucker's dead," he said flatly. Silas stiffened. "What?" "Shot 3 days ago trying to rob the stage from Kingman. Seems he needed money to cover his gambling debts." The man called Dawson took a step toward them. "So whatever deal you had with him died too." Silas's grip on Josephine's arm tightened painfully. "Then I'll find another buyer." Plenty of men in this territory would pay for a woman like this. Not in Chloride, they won't. Dawson's hand rested casually on his holster. "We don't trade in people here." Josephine felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. She'd learned the hard way that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She's mine, Silas insisted. Paid $15 to her previous owner. Dawson's expression didn't change, but something dangerous glinted in his eyes. I'll give you 20 to release her. Right now. Silas hesitated, clearly calculating his options. Finally, greed won out. Make it 30. 25 and you leave town within the hour. After a tense moment, Silas shoved Josephine toward Dawson. Fine. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway. Dawson reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of bills, counting them deliberately before handing them over. If I see you in Chloride after sundown, I'll have the sheriff arrest you for trafficking. Silas snatched the money, spat in the dust, and stalked away, leaving Josephine swaying unsteadily before the tall stranger. She kept her eyes downcast, afraid to look at him directly, uncertain what this new transaction meant for her future. Miss, the man said, his voice gentler now. My name's Isaac Dawson. I own the Silver Strike Ranch outside of town. Josephine remained silent, her heart pounding. I didn't buy you, he continued. I paid him to leave you alone. You're free to go wherever you wish. She finally raised her eyes to his face, searching for the lie, the trap. Men didn't simply help women like her without expecting something in return. Why? Isaac Dawson shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. Because no person should own another. It's 1881, not 1861. The war settled that question. Josephine gave a bitter laugh. Tell that to the men who have bought and sold me these past 3 months. She touched her shoulder instinctively. His eyes followed the movement. You're hurt? It's nothing. She stepped back, suddenly conscious of how exposed she was on the main street, aware of curious glances from passers-by. Isaac seemed to notice her discomfort. Look, I have a sister. She runs a boarding house at the edge of town. You can stay there, get cleaned up, have a proper meal. No strings attached. Josephine stared at him, weighing his offer against her limited options. She had no money, no friends, nowhere to go. And despite her wariness, something about Isaac Dawson's straightforward gaze made her want to trust him. Why help me? She asked again. He studied her for a long moment. Because it's the right thing to do. Then he added, more quietly, and because I know what it's like to be marked by circumstances beyond your control. Before she could respond, he gestured toward the far end of the street. The boarding house is that 2-story white building with the blue trim. Tell Rachel I sent you. I'll settle up with her later. Josephine hesitated. And then what? Then you decide what comes next. He tipped his hat slightly. It's your life, madam, no one else's. With that, Isaac Dawson turned and walked back into the saloon, leaving Josephine standing alone in the dusty street of Chloride, facing her first moment of freedom in months and having no idea what to do with it. After a moment of stunned indecision, Josephine gathered her courage and began walking toward the boarding house. Her legs were unsteady, and each step sent pain shooting through her blistered feet, but the possibility of clean water and a real bed propelled her forward. The boarding house was a well-maintained structure with neat curtains in the windows and a small garden struggling valiantly against the Arizona heat. Josephine paused at the front steps, suddenly conscious of her appearance, the dirty, torn dress, her matted hair, the grime coating her skin. What would Isaac Dawson's sister think of such a woman appearing on her doorstep? Before she could retreat, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was shorter than Josephine, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother, though her hair was a lighter brown streaked with gold. She wore a practical blue dress with the sleeves rolled up, and flour dusted her hands and forearms. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone neither friendly nor hostile, merely curious. Josephine swallowed hard. "Your brother, Mr. Dawson, he sent me. She faltered, unsure how to explain her situation. The woman's expression softened immediately. "You must be in trouble if Isaac sent you here. Come in, please." She wiped her hands on her apron and held the door open. "I'm Rachel Dawson." "Josephine Taylor," she replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue after so long being referred to only as girl or worse. Rachel led her into a cozy parlor, then through to a kitchen warm with the scent of baking bread. "Sit down before you fall down," she said, gesturing to a chair at the wooden table. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. Some beans and hardtack." Rachel clicked her tongue disapprovingly and immediately set about slicing bread and cheese, placing them before Josephine along with a cup of sweet tea. "Eat slowly," she cautioned. "Your stomach will need time to adjust." Josephine had to force herself not to wolf down the food. It was the finest meal she'd had in months, simple fare, but fresh and clean. As she ate, Rachel moved efficiently around the kitchen, adding wood to the stove and setting a large pot of water to heat. She didn't press Josephine for details about her circumstances, a kindness that brought unexpected tears to Josephine's eyes. "My brother has a habit of finding strays," Rachel said finally, sitting across from her. "People or animals, if they're in trouble, Isaac can't seem to help himself." Josephine set down her cup. "He paid a man who had." She couldn't finish. "I understand," Rachel said quietly. "You don't need to explain unless you want to. Isaac will have had his reasons." "He said I could stay here." Rachel nodded. "Of course. I have a room ready upstairs. And you'll be needing a bath and clean clothes, I expect." She studied Josephine with a professional eye. "We're of a similar build. I can lend you some things until we get you sorted." The kindness was overwhelming after months of cruelty. Josephine found herself unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Are you hurt?" Rachel asked gently. "I have some skill with medicines." Josephine hesitated, then nodded. "My back, it's—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word. Rachel's expression remained composed, though something flashed in her eyes. "We'll tend to it after your bath. The hot water will help with the pain." An hour later, Josephine sank into a copper tub filled with steaming water in a small room off the kitchen. Rachel had provided soap, a soft cloth, and privacy luxuries Josephine had nearly forgotten. She scrubbed away weeks of grime, wincing as the water stung various cuts and scrapes. The brand on her shoulder burned fiercely when touched, but she forced herself to clean it thoroughly. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a borrowed robe with her damp hair combed through, she found Rachel waiting with bandages and a jar of salve. "Let me see," Rachel said simply. Josephine turned and lowered the robe just enough to expose the mark. She heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath, but was grateful when the woman made no comment. Instead, Rachel gently applied the salve to the inflamed skin around the crude symbol. "It's healing, but there's some infection," she said clinically. "This will draw it out. We'll change the dressing daily." "It will always be there, won't it?" Josephine asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her since the hot iron had first touched her skin. Rachel's hands paused in their work. "The scar, yes, but what it represents, that's up to you." After bandaging the wound, Rachel showed Josephine to a small but clean bedroom on the second floor. A bed with a proper mattress and quilt dominated the space, with a washstand, a small dresser, and a rocking chair by the window completing the furnishings. "Rest now," Rachel said. "We can talk more tomorrow about what you want to do next." Left alone, Josephine sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry not the silent tears she'd learned to hide from her captors, but deep, racking sobs that purged some of the terror and shame she'd been carrying. She fell asleep before darkness fell, her body demanding the rest it had been denied for so long. Her last conscious thought was of Isaac Dawson's face when he'd told her she was free, the unexpected kindness in eyes as clear and blue as the Arizona sky. Isaac Dawson rode back to his ranch that evening with a troubled mind. The woman's face haunted him, her wariness, her distrust, the hollow look in her eyes that spoke of experiences no person should endure. He'd seen that look before, during the war and after, when human dignity was stripped away by force or circumstance. The silver strike spread out before him as he crested the final hill, 300 acres of hard-won land, nestled in a valley with a reliable creek that kept his cattle watered even in the driest seasons. The main house was modest but solid, built with his own hands over the course of 2 years. Nearby stood the bunkhouse, stables, and various outbuildings that comprised a working ranch. Lights glowed in the bunkhouse windows, where his 5 ranch hands would be finishing their supper. Isaac bypassed it, heading straight for the main house. He unsaddled his horse, rubbed him down, and provided fresh hay before entering through the kitchen door. The house was quiet and dark, except for a single lamp left burning on the table. Isaac removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, then poured himself a small measure of whiskey and sat heavily in his favorite chair. The woman Josephine, Rachel had called her in the brief note sent to the saloon by one of the town's messenger boys, would be safe at the boarding house. Rachel had a good heart but a practical nature. She wouldn't ask unnecessary questions or make judgments. She'd seen enough of life's hardships to understand that people's stories weren't always simple. Isaac ran a hand through his hair, sighing deeply. He hadn't planned to involve himself in the situation. He'd merely been settling accounts at the Golden Nugget when he'd seen Silas dragging the exhausted woman toward the saloon. Something in her, bearing the dignity she maintained despite her circumstances, had struck him. And when he'd realized what Silas was doing, buying her from one man to deliver her to another, the whiskey burned pleasantly as he swallowed it. The war had ended 16 years ago, but some men still believed they had the right to own others. It wasn't always as blatant as shackles and auction blocks, but the principle remained the same. Isaac had fought against that principle, had seen good men die for it, and he couldn't stand by while it happened in his town. He poured another small measure, then corked the bottle firmly. Tomorrow would bring a full day's work, and he needed a clear head. He'd check on the woman in a few days, make sure she had what she needed to move on. His responsibility ended there. Even as he thought it, Isaac knew it wasn't true. Something about Josephine Taylor had gotten under his skin, and he suspected she wouldn't be easily forgotten. Morning came to the boarding house with the scent of coffee and the quiet murmur of voices from downstairs. Josephine woke disoriented, momentarily panicked by the unfamiliar surroundings until memory returned. She was in Chloride, in Rachel Dawson's boarding house. She was safe, at least for now. She dressed in the clothes Rachel had provided, a simple blue skirt and white blouse that were slightly loose but clean and whole. After braiding her hair and washing her face in the basin on the washstand, she made her way downstairs. The dining room held a long table where several people were already eating breakfast. Rachel moved efficiently between them and the kitchen, refilling coffee cups and responding to requests for more biscuits or jam. She brightened when she saw Josephine. "Good morning. You're looking much better. Come, have some breakfast." Josephine took the empty seat Rachel indicated, nodding politely to the other boarders, 2 older gentlemen who appeared to be minors, and a middle-aged woman with spectacles who was reading a book propped against the sugar bowl. "This is Miss Taylor," Rachel announced. "She'll be staying with us for a while." The others offered brief greetings before returning to their meals, accepting her presence without question. Josephine felt a rush of gratitude for the normalcy of the moment, sitting at a table eating breakfast like any ordinary person, not an object to be bought and sold. After the other boarders had departed for their day's activities, Rachel sat down across from Josephine with her own cup of coffee. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked. "Better. Thank you for your kindness." Rachel waved away the thanks. "Now we should talk about what comes next. Do you have family somewhere we could contact?" Josephine shook her head. "My parents died of fever 5 years ago. I was working as a seamstress in Tucson. She swallowed hard. When some men came to the shop where I worked, they killed the owner and took me and another girl. They said we'd be working in a house in California, but instead they sold us to different buyers at a camp near the border." Rachel's face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. The man who bought me kept me for 2 months. Then he lost me in a card game to the man who put this on me." Josephine touched her shoulder. "He's the one who sold me to Silas, who was bringing me to someone named Tucker, who's now dead," Rachel finished, "which is why Isaac intervened." She studied Josephine thoughtfully. "Can you so well?" The question was so unexpected that Josephine blinked in surprise. "Yes, it was my trade. I'm very skilled with a needle. Chloride is growing. We have a dressmaker, Mrs. Willoughby, but she's getting on in years and complains constantly about her eyes. She might welcome an assistant." Rachel set down her cup decisively. "And in the meantime, you're welcome to stay here. I could use help with the boarding house cooking, cleaning, laundry, room and board in exchange for work until you decide what you want to do." Josephine stared at her, searching for the catch. "Why would you help me like this? You don't know me." Rachel's expression softened. "My brother and I were orphaned young. We know what it's like to be at the mercy of others. Isaac went to war when he was barely 18, and I was left with relatives who treated me like an unpaid servant. If someone had offered me kindness and a fair chance then, it would have meant everything." She reached across the table to touch Josephine's hand briefly. "Besides, I could genuinely use the help. I have 6 regular boarders and often take in travelers passing through." Thank you, I accept your offer." Rachel nodded, satisfied. "Good. We'll start by changing that bandage, and then I'll show you around the house." The next week passed in a blur of activity as Josephine settled into life at the boarding house. The work was hard but satisfying, scrubbing floors, hanging laundry, helping prepare meals for the boarders. Each night she fell into bed exhausted, but with the clean fatigue of honest labor rather than the bone-deep weariness of captivity. Rachel proved to be a fair employer and a kind companion. She never pressed Josephine for details about her ordeal, but listened attentively when Josephine chose to share fragments of her story. In turn, Rachel spoke of growing up in Missouri, losing their parents to cholera, and following Isaac west after the war. "He came home different," Rachel said one evening as they sat shelling peas on the back porch. "Quieter, more serious. He'd seen too much death for someone so young, but he had this dream of building something of his own, somewhere new." "The silver strike," Josephine said. Rachel nodded. "He worked other men's ranches for years, saving every penny. Took jobs breaking horses that no one else would touch. Nearly got himself killed a dozen times, but when he finally had enough to buy that land." She smiled at the memory. "I've never seen anyone so proud." Josephine tried to reconcile this image with the stern-faced man who had confronted Silas. "He seems formidable. Isaac can be hard when he needs to be. This territory demands it, but at heart, he's a good man." Rachel glanced at Josephine. "He's asked about you, you know. Sent a note yesterday asking if you were settling in all right." Josephine felt an unexpected warmth at the thought that Isaac Dawson had spared her a thought amid his busy life. "What did you tell him?" that you're a godsend in the kitchen and have already reorganized my linen closet more efficiently than I ever could." Rachel grinned. "I also mentioned that Mrs. Willoughby was indeed looking for help and that I'd arranged for you to meet her tomorrow. You did." Josephine's heart leaped at the prospect of returning to her trade. 10 o'clock. She's expecting you. Rachel's expression grew serious. "It would mean having your own income, Josephine. Your own money that no one could take from you." Independence, the word hung unspoken between them. After months of having her every movement controlled by others, the possibility of building a life on her own terms seemed almost too much to hope for. The following morning, Josephine dressed with special care in one of Rachel's nicer dresses, which had been hastily altered to fit her taller frame. The dressmaker's shop was located on a side street off Chloride's main thoroughfare, a neat storefront with bolts of fabric displayed in the window, and a bell that tinkled cheerfully when Josephine entered. Mrs. Willoughby proved to be a tiny woman with wispy white hair and spectacles that magnified her sharp eyes. She questioned Josephine thoroughly about her experience, then set her a test, hemming a delicate piece of silk and attaching a row of small pearl buttons to a bodice. "Your stitches are excellent," she pronounced after examining Josephine's work. "Even and strong, and you have a good eye for detail." She peered at Josephine over her spectacles. "Rachel says you need a fresh start. I won't ask why. Lord knows we all have things in our past we'd rather not discuss." She named a weekly wage that was fair if not generous, with the possibility of increasing as Josephine took on more responsibility. "I open at 9 and close at 5, except Saturdays when we close at noon. Sundays off, of course." "Thank you, Mrs. Willoughby. I'd be very grateful for the position." The older woman nodded briskly. "You can start tomorrow. We're something practical. We'll be on our feet most of the day." Josephine left the shop with a lighter step than she'd had in months. Employment, honest work doing something she enjoyed, it was more than she had dared to hope for. Her path back to the boarding house took her past the general store, where a familiar tall figure was loading supplies into a wagon. Isaac Dawson looked up as she approached, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Miss Taylor," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "You're looking well." Josephine felt suddenly shy, conscious of her borrowed dress, and the fact that their only previous interaction had involved her at her most vulnerable. "Mr. Dawson, I wanted to thank you for your help last week, and for sending me to your sister. Rachel says you've been a great help to her." His expression was hard to read, but his blue eyes studied her intently. "Are you finding Chloride to your liking? Everyone has been kind. I've just secured a position with Mrs. Willoughby, the dressmaker." Something like approval flickered across his face. "That's good news." "She's a fair employer, if a bit particular about her standards." "I appreciate high standards in my trade," Josephine replied, feeling a flicker of her old confidence return. "Quality workmanship matters." He smiled then, transforming his stern features into something warmer. "Indeed it does, Miss Taylor." An awkward silence fell between them. Josephine was acutely aware of passers-by glancing curiously in their direction, the respected rancher conversing with the mysterious new woman in town. "I should let you get back to your work," she said finally. "But I wanted you to know that your kindness made a difference. I won't forget it." Isaac nodded, something unreadable passing through his eyes. "Sometimes a person just needs a chance to start over." He hesitated, then added, "Rachel's hosting Sunday dinner after church this week. I'll be there. Perhaps you'll join us." The invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to intrude on family time." "It's hardly an intrusion if you're invited," he pointed out with a hint of dry humor. "Besides, Rachel always cooks enough for an army. Someone needs to help eat it all." Despite herself, Josephine smiled. "Then I accept. Thank you." As she continued toward the boarding house, Josephine realized she was looking forward to Sunday with an anticipation that felt foreign after months of dreading each new day. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt like another step toward reclaiming the person she had been before, a woman with hopes and choices, not just a branded possession. The dressmaker's shop became Josephine's sanctuary. Mrs. Willoughby ran a tight operation but recognized Josephine's skill with a needle and increasingly trusted her with more complex work. By the end of her first week, Josephine was handling alterations independently and assisting with the creation of a wedding dress for the banker's daughter. The work was satisfying, the routine comforting. Each morning, Josephine rose early to help with breakfast at the boarding house, then walked to the shop where she spent the day surrounded by the familiar textures of fabrics and the precise work of cutting, pinning, and stitching. Each evening, she returned to share supper with Rachel and the boarders, followed by quiet hours mending or reading before bed. The brand on her back was healing, though the scar would remain. Rachel continued to apply salve to it daily, noting with satisfaction that the infection had cleared. "It will always be there," she said matter-of-factly, "but it will fade with time." Josephine wished she could believe the same about the memories, which still invaded her dreams and sometimes left her gasping awake in the darkness, convinced she was back in that camp, waiting to be sold again. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a freshness in the air that hinted at the eventual end of summer's heat. Josephine dressed for church in a new dress, her first purchase with her own earnings, a modest lavender cotton with white trim that Mrs. Willoughby had helped her select and sew during quiet moments at the shop. The small white church near the center of town was nearly full when Josephine entered with Rachel. She felt eyes on her, the newcomer, the subject of speculation and gossip, but kept her head high as she followed Rachel to a pew near the middle. Isaac was already seated there, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark vest that transformed him from working rancher to respected citizen. He stood as they approached, nodding a greeting to his sister and offering Josephine a slight smile that she found herself returning. The service passed in a blur of hymns and prayers. Josephine found comfort in the familiar rituals, though she hadn't attended church regularly since her parents' deaths. The preacher's sermon focused on redemption and second chances, themes that resonated powerfully with her current circumstances. Afterward, as the congregation filed out into the sunshine, Isaac walked beside Josephine, his tall presence creating a buffer between her and the curious stares of Chloride's residents. "Mrs. Willoughby mentioned you're doing excellent work," he said as they followed Rachel toward the boarding house. Josephine glanced up at him, surprised. "You've spoken to Mrs. Willoughby about me?" A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "Chloride's a small town. People talk." But in this case, it was Mrs. Willoughby who brought up the subject. "She was fitting me for a new vest yesterday." "I see." Josephine wasn't sure how to feel about being discussed, even favorably. For too long, her fate had been determined by others' conversations. Isaac seemed to sense her discomfort. "I didn't mean to pry into your affairs, Miss Taylor. I'm just glad to hear you're finding your place here." His sincerity was evident, and Josephine felt her wariness ease. "Thank you. It feels good to be useful again, to have purpose." They reached the boarding house, where Rachel had hurried ahead to begin final preparations for dinner. The scent of roasting chicken greeted them as they entered, along with the earthy aroma of fresh bread and something sweet apple pie. Josephine guessed, having helped prepare the apples the previous evening. The meal was served in the dining room, with just the three of them seated at one end of the long table. The conversation flowed more easily than Josephine had expected, with Rachel recounting amusing stories about her boarders and Isaac describing the challenges of breaking a particularly stubborn horse. "He has spirit," Isaac said, a grudging admiration in his voice. "Refuses to be cowed, no matter what. There's something to be said for that kind of determination." "You always did prefer the difficult cases," Rachel teased, refilling their coffee cups. "Remember that spotted mare that nearly killed you twice before you finally won her over?" "Morning Star," Isaac nodded, his expression softening at the memory. "She turned out to be the finest cutting horse I ever trained. Sometimes the ones with the most fire in them just need someone to understand their nature." Josephine found herself studying him as he spoke, the weathered lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled. The careful way he handled the delicate china cup that seemed too small in his calloused hands. The quiet authority in his bearing that required no bluster or demonstration. "What about you, Miss Taylor?" he asked suddenly, turning those clear blue eyes on her. "Were you always skilled with a needle, or did you discover the talent later?" "My mother taught me to sew when I was very young," Josephine replied, the memory bittersweet. "She made all our clothes and took in mending to help make ends meet. By the time I was 12, I was helping her with the finer work. Her eyesight was never very good. After she and my father died, it seemed natural to continue the trade." "You mentioned you were working in Tucson before." Isaac left the sentence unfinished, clearly hesitant to directly reference her captivity. "Yes, for a dressmaker named Mrs. Abernathy. She specialized in fashionable gowns for the wives of territorial officials and wealthy merchants." Josephine's voice faltered as she remembered the day the shop had been attacked. Mrs. Abernathy shot without warning when she tried to protect her assistants. Rachel reached across the table to squeeze her hand briefly. "You don't have to speak of it if you'd rather not. It's all right." Josephine took a deep breath. "It happened, pretending it won't change anything." "No," Isaac said quietly, "but neither does dwelling on things we can't change. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us." His words struck a chord deep within Josephine. For months, she'd been defined solely by what had happened to her victim, captive property. Even now, she sometimes felt as though the brand on her back had somehow marked her soul as well as her skin. "Is that really possible?" she asked, the question more vulnerable than she'd intended. "To move beyond what's happened to you," Isaac's gaze held her steadily. "I believe it is, with time, with purpose, with people who see you for who you are, not what's been done to you." The conviction in his voice made Josephine want to believe him. She realized with sudden clarity that she wanted to be more than a survivor of trauma. She wanted to be wholly herself again, the woman who had dreams and ambitions beyond mere existence. After dinner, while Rachel busied herself in the kitchen, Isaac invited Josephine to join him on the front porch. They sat in matching rocking chairs, watching the slow parade of Sunday afternoon strollers passing by on the street. "I wanted to ask you something," Isaac said after a comfortable silence. "The Silver Strike is hosting a barn raising next Saturday. One of my hands is getting married, and I'm building them a cabin on the property. The whole town turns out for these things: food, music, dancing afterward." He turned to look at her directly. "Would you consider attending as my guest?" Josephine's heart beat faster at the unexpected invitation. I'm not sure I'd be welcome. People talk, as you said. They must wonder about me." "Let them wonder," Isaac replied with a hint of stubbornness. "You have as much right to be there as anyone." His conviction warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. "Then yes, I'd be honored to attend." The week leading up to the barn raising passed in a blur of activity. At the dress shop, Mrs. Willoughby was busier than usual with orders for new dresses and alterations to existing ones. Everyone wanted to look their best for the social event of the season. Barn raisings are more than just building something, Mrs. Willoughby explained as she and Josephine worked side by side on a green silk dress. They're how we strengthen the community. Everyone contributes what they can. The men build, the women cook, the children run messages and fetch tools. By sundown, a family has a new home, and everyone remembers why we choose to live out here in this harsh land. It sounds wonderful, Josephine said, carefully stitching a row of tiny pearl buttons along a cuff. Mrs. Willoughby gave her a shrewd look over her spectacles. I hear Isaac Dawson himself invited you. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. News travels fast. In Chloride, faster than telegraph wire. The older woman snipped a thread decisively. Isaac's a good man, keeps to himself mostly, but he's respected. Folks were beginning to wonder if he'd ever show interest in any woman. It's just an invitation to a community event, Josephine protested. Nothing more. Mrs. Willoughby merely hummed noncommittally and reached for another pin. Despite her protests, Josephine found herself spending extra time that week on a new dress for the occasion, a sky blue cotton with white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It was modest but becoming, and as she tried it on for a final fitting the night before the barn raising, she allowed herself to feel a flutter of excitement. Rachel appeared in the doorway of Josephine's room, smiling approvingly. That color suits you beautifully. It brings out the gold in your hair. Do you think it's appropriate? Josephine turned anxiously to check her reflection in the small mirror. I don't want to draw attention. You'll draw attention regardless, arriving with my brother, Rachel said practically. You might as well look your best while doing so. She stepped into the room, a small box in her hands. I have something for you, a loan for tomorrow. Inside the box lay a simple silver pendant on a delicate chain, a small star with a tiny blue stone at its center. It was our mother's, Rachel explained. Isaac gave it to me after the war when he came home, said it reminded him of nights on the battlefield, looking up at the stars and remembering home. She lifted it from the box. It would complement your dress perfectly. Josephine was touched by the gesture. Rachel, I couldn't possibly. Of course you can. That's what friends do. Rachel fastened the necklace around Josephine's neck, then stepped back to admire the effect. Perfect. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Isaac arrived early the next morning, driving a wagon rather than riding horseback. He was dressed in clean work clothes, practical for the day's labor ahead, but freshly pressed. His face brightened visibly when Josephine emerged from the boarding house in her blue dress, the silver star catching the morning light. Miss Taylor, he said, helping her up to the wagon seat. You look lovely. Thank you. And please, after everything, I think you might call me Josephine. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. Josephine, then, and I'm Isaac. The drive to the Silver Strike took nearly an hour, giving Josephine her first real glimpse of the countryside surrounding Chloride. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, rugged mountains in the distance, valleys dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of juniper and pine. The ranch itself nestled in a protected valley with a clear creek running through it, green pastures stretching toward distant hills where cattle grazed. It's beautiful, Josephine said as the main house came into view, a sturdy two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. It's home, Isaac replied simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. The site for the new cabin was located a quarter-mile from the main house, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. Several wagons were already there, men unloading lumber and tools while women set up long tables under a canvas awning where food would be served later. Throughout the morning, more families arrived until it seemed half of Chloride was present. The mood was festive despite the serious work at hand. Men organized themselves into teams, with Isaac directing operations with quiet authority. Women chatted as they prepared an enormous midday meal. Children darted between groups carrying messages or tools, and older folks sat in the shade offering advice based on decades of experience. Josephine found herself welcomed into the women's circle with surprising ease. Rachel's presence helped, as did the fact that many of the women knew her from the dress shop. If they were curious about her background or her relationship with Isaac, they kept their questions general and their manner friendly. By noon, the frame of the cabin stood complete, and everyone broke for a meal that resembled a feast more than a simple lunch. Isaac found Josephine amid the crowd and led her to a quiet spot under a cottonwood tree, where they could eat while watching the activity around them. "What do you think of the silver strike?" he asked, his eyes scanning his property with the watchful gaze of a man responsible for many lives and livelihoods. "It's impressive," Josephine replied honestly. "You've built something remarkable here. It's been hard work." "When I bought this land, there was nothing but grass and sky." He gestured toward the bustling scene before them. "Now there are 15 people who depend on this ranch for their living. 20 once Pete and Sarah move into their cabin. You care about them, your workers." Isaac nodded. "A ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's people, community." He turned to look at her directly. "That's what I fought for in the war. Not just big ideas about union and freedom, but the right of ordinary people to build lives of dignity, to work hard and see the fruits of their labor, to be treated with respect." Josephine was struck by the passion beneath his usually reserved demeanor. "You believe in those things deeply." "I saw too many men die for those principles to take them lightly." His expression softened. "But enough about my philosophies. Are you enjoying yourself?" "Very much. Everyone has been kind." Josephine hesitated, then added, "I wasn't sure they would be, given that they must wonder about me." Isaac's jaw tightened slightly. "If anyone has made you feel unwelcome, no, she hastened to assure him. "Just the opposite. I'm just not accustomed to such acceptance." She touched her shoulder unconsciously. "After what happened?" Isaac followed the gesture with his eyes. Understanding dawned in his expression, followed by a gentleness that made Josephine's heart beat faster. "That mark doesn't define you, Josephine," he said quietly. "Not to me, and not to anyone whose opinion matters." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by calls that the meal was ending and work resuming. Isaac was needed to direct the raising of the roof trusses, the most challenging part of the day's labor. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The cabin took shape before their eyes, walls rising, roof being shingled, windows and doors installed. By late afternoon, it stood complete except for interior details that would be finished in the coming days. The young couple who would occupy it, Pete, one of Isaac's most trusted hands, and Sarah, his bride of 2 weeks, were presented with the keys amid cheers and well wishes. As dusk approached, the work gave way to celebration. Tables were laden with food for supper, lanterns were lit and strung between trees, and a small group of musicians unpacked fiddles, guitars, and a harmonica. The first stars appeared in the darkening sky as people finished eating and the music began. Isaac found Josephine again as the dancing started. "Would you honor me?" he asked, extending his hand. Josephine hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'm not sure I remember how." "It's been a long time." "It will come back to you," he assured her. They joined the other couples forming lines for a Virginia reel. The music was lively, the calls clear, and Josephine found herself laughing as Isaac guided her through the steps. He was surprisingly graceful for such a tall man, moving with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything. As the evening progressed, They danced several more times, a waltz that brought them closer together, his hand warm at her waist, a lively polka that left them both breathless and smiling. Between dances, Isaac introduced her to more of his workers and neighbors, his manner making it clear that she was someone he valued. During a break in the music, he led her away from the lights and noise, toward the creek where the water gurgled peacefully over stones. The night was mild, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Arizona sky. "Thank you for coming today," Isaac said, his voice low. "Having you here has made it special." Josephine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. "Thank you for inviting me. It's been wonderful to be part of something so positive, so full of hope." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the creek and the distant sounds of music and laughter. "Josephine," Isaac began, then hesitated. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I find myself thinking about you often. I enjoy your company and I'd like to see more of you, if you're amenable." The formal phrasing made her smile. "Are you courting me, Isaac Dawson?" In the moonlight, she could see color rise in his face. "I suppose I am. Rather clumsily, it seems." "Not clumsily at all," she assured him, her heart racing. "And yes, I'd like that very much." His smile in response was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transformative, illuminating. He took her hand gently, his calloused fingers enveloping hers. "We should return before they send a search party," he said. "But perhaps tomorrow you might join me for dinner at the hotel in town. I'd like to speak with you more about the future." "I'd be honored," Josephine replied, feeling as though her feet barely touched the ground as they walked back toward the lights and music. As fall crept across the Arizona territory, bringing cooler nights and golden afternoons, Josephine's life in Chloride settled into a pattern that felt increasingly like belonging. Her days were spent at the dress shop, where Mrs. Willoughby was gradually entrusting her with more responsibility, including meeting directly with customers to discuss designs and fittings. Her evenings and Sundays belonged increasingly to Isaac. Their courtship progressed with a deliberate pace that suited them both: dinners at the hotel, rides in the countryside surrounding Chloride, quiet conversations on the boarding house porch under Rachel's discreetly approving eye. Isaac was careful never to rush her, seeming to understand instinctively that Josephine needed time to rebuild her sense of safety and trust. He spoke openly of his past, his childhood in Missouri, the brutality he'd witnessed during the war, his determination afterward to build something meaningful and lasting. In turn, Josephine gradually shared more of her own story, including the darkest moments of her captivity. "I thought I would die there," she confessed one evening as they sat beside the creek on the Silver Strike, watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson. "Not from mistreatment, though there was plenty of that, but from losing myself. Each day I could feel another piece of who I was slipping away." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, giving her space to continue. "The brand was the worst," she said, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Not just the pain, though that was beyond anything I could have imagined, but what it represented, that I was property, that someone could mark me permanently as belonging to them." She looked up at Isaac, tears glistening in her eyes. "How do you move beyond that? How do you become yourself again after being reduced to an object?" Isaac took her hand gently between both of his. "You're doing it every day. Every time you make a choice for yourself. Every time you create something beautiful with your hands. Every time you laugh or cry or speak your mind." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "You're not what was done to you, Josephine. You're what you choose to become despite it." His words penetrated the protective shell she'd built around her heart. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, their first kiss, initiated by her, an act of choice and desire rather than submission. Isaac responded with careful restraint, his lips warm against hers, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. When they parted, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Why didn't you?" Josephine asked, still close enough to feel his breath on her face. "Because it needed to be your choice. Everything between us needs to be your choice." His understanding overwhelmed her. For the first time since her ordeal began, Josephine felt truly seen, not as a victim or a damaged thing to be pitied, but as a woman with agency and worth. As October turned to November, Josephine made a decision. Using the money she'd carefully saved from her wages at the dress shop, she put a deposit on a small cottage at the edge of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it would be hers alone. "Are you certain you want to leave the boarding house?" Rachel asked when Josephine shared her news. "You know you're welcome here as long as you wish to stay." "I'm certain," Josephine replied. "You've given me so much, Rachel. Safety when I needed it most, friendship, a chance to rebuild. But I need to stand on my own to know that I can." Rachel's eyes filled with understanding. "Of course you do. And you can always come back if you need to." The cottage required work, repairs to the roof, fresh paint, a thorough cleaning, but the landlord agreed to reduce the rent in exchange for Josephine handling these improvements herself. Isaac insisted on helping, spending his free days replacing damaged boards in the porch and securing loose shingles on the roof. "You don't have to do this," Josephine told him one Saturday as they painted the front room together, sunlight streaming through the newly washed windows. "I know," he replied simply. "I want to. Besides, I'm rather good at it," she laughed, flicking a drop of paint in his direction. "And modest too." His answering smile transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way that made Josephine's heart flutter. Over the weeks of their courtship, she'd come to treasure those rare, unguarded moments when the weight of responsibility lifted from his shoulders, and the younger, lighter Isaac emerged. By early December, the cottage was ready for habitation. Rachel and several women from town helped Josephine furnish it with donated items, and a few carefully chosen new pieces: a comfortable bed, a sturdy table for sewing, a rocking chair for the small porch. On the evening before she was to move in, Isaac invited her to dinner at the hotel. The dining room was decorated for Christmas, with pine boughs and red ribbons adorning the walls and candles glowing on every table. They were seated in a quiet corner, away from curious eyes. After they'd eaten, Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I have something for you." A housewarming gift. Josephine opened it to find a key resting on a bed of cotton. "Is this for your cottage? I had a new lock installed yesterday while you were at work. The old one was worn and not very secure." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to be safe, Josephine. But more than that, I want you to feel safe, to know that you control who enters your home and who doesn't." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to her eyes. Isaac had understood exactly what the cottage represented to her: not just independence, but control over her own space after having that control violently taken from her. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her fingers around the key. "This means more than I can say." Isaac nodded, his expression turning serious. "There's something else I want to discuss with you, a proposition." Josephine raised an eyebrow. "That sounds rather formal." "It is, in a way." He took a deep breath. "The silver strike is growing. I've purchased additional acreage to the north, and I'm expanding the herd next spring. I'll need to hire more hands, build additional housing." "That's wonderful news," Josephine said, though she wasn't sure what this had to do with her. "With the expansion comes more administrative work: correspondence, accounts, Records. Rachel has been helping when she can, but with the boarding house keeping her busy. He met Josephine's eyes directly. I'd like to offer you a position as the ranch's bookkeeper and secretary. The offer took her by surprise, but I know nothing about ranching or bookkeeping. You're intelligent and detail-oriented. You can learn the specifics. Isaac leaned forward, his expression earnest. You mentioned once that you handled the accounts for Mrs. Abernathy's shop in Tucson. This wouldn't be so different. Josephine considered the proposal. The work at the dress shop was satisfying, but the opportunity Isaac offered would provide new challenges and likely better compensation. Yet something about the timing gave her pause. Why now? She asked. Is this because of the cottage? Because you're concerned about me living alone? Isaac shook his head firmly. No, it's because the ranch needs someone with your skills, and I believe you would excel at the position. He hesitated, then added more softly, though I won't pretend I wouldn't enjoy having you at the Silver Strike more often. The honesty of his response reassured her. I'd need to give Mrs. Willoughby proper notice. And I'd want to continue some dressmaking work, perhaps taking special orders in my free time. Of course, whatever terms you wish to set. His blue eyes held her steadily. This isn't charity, Josephine. It's a business proposition that I believe would benefit us both. Though I hope you know by now that my interest in you extends far beyond business. Heat rose in Josephine's cheeks at the quiet intensity of his gaze. I'll consider it carefully and give you my answer soon. That night, alone in her room at the boarding house for the last time, Josephine weighed Isaac's offer against her own needs and desires. The position would provide security and new challenges. It would also bring her and Isaac into daily contact, a prospect both thrilling and somewhat daunting. Their courtship had progressed with careful deliberation, each of them revealing themselves in measured increments. Josephine had come to trust Isaac deeply, to value his integrity and quiet strength. She had even begun to hope that their relationship might eventually lead to more permanent bonds. But was she ready for the complications that working together might bring? Would accepting his offer suggest obligations beyond the professional? And most importantly, was she making the choice for the right reasons, not out of gratitude or dependency, but as an independent woman pursuing her own best interests? The questions circled in her mind as she drifted into sleep. In her dreams, she stood on the porch of a home, not her small cottage, but a larger house with a view of mountains and open range. Isaac was beside her, his arm around her waist, both of them watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and crimson. She woke with the dream still vivid in her mind, and a decision forming in her heart. She would accept Isaac's offer, but on her own terms, maintaining her cottage in town, establishing clear boundaries between their professional and personal relationships, ensuring her independence remained intact even as their lives became more intertwined. The day of her move to the cottage dawned clear and cold. Rachel helped her transport her few possessions from the boarding house, and by noon, Josephine was officially established in her own home. Standing in the center of the front room, surrounded by simple furniture and the few personal items she'd accumulated since arriving in Chloride, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This space was hers alone, earned through her own labor, secured by her own key. Isaac arrived in the late afternoon, carrying a housewarming gift, a small sewing table with intricate inlay work. I commissioned it from Mr. Chen, the cabinet maker in Kingman, he explained as Josephine ran her fingers over the polished surface. I described what you might need for your dressmaking. The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. It's beautiful, thank you. She gestured toward the kitchen where a pot simmered on the stove. I've made stew. Would you stay for supper? It would be my first time hosting a guest in my own home. Isaac's smile was warm. I'd be honored. They ate at Josephine's small table, talking easily about the cottage, the upcoming Christmas celebrations in town, the mild winter the territory was experiencing. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, they moved to sit before the small fireplace, where a modest fire kept the evening chill at bay. "I've been thinking about your offer," Josephine said finally. "The position at Silver Strike." Isaac waited, his expression attentive but carefully neutral. "I'd like to accept," she continued, "but I have conditions." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I expected nothing less." Josephine outlined her terms, maintaining her cottage in town, starting with 3 days per week at the ranch to determine if the arrangement suited them both, continuing to take special dressmaking commissions when time permitted. And she concluded, "Our professional relationship must remain separate from our personal one. I won't have people thinking I earned the position through other means." "Agreed," Isaac said without hesitation. "On all counts." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "You drive a hard bargain, Josephine Taylor." "I'm learning to value myself appropriately," she replied with a small smile. Isaac's expression grew serious. "You should. You're the strongest person I know." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "What you've overcome, how you've rebuilt your life, it humbles me." Josephine shook her head. "I'm not strong, I'm just stubborn, unwilling to let them win." "That is strength." Isaac leaned closer. "May I kiss you, Josephine?" The formal request, acknowledging her right to refuse, touched her deeply. "Yes," she whispered. His lips met hers with gentle pressure, the kiss deepening as Josephine responded. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch reverent, asking rather than demanding. When they finally parted, both were breathing quickly, eyes dark with desire. Isaac rested his forehead against hers for a moment, then reluctantly stood. "I should go. It's getting late." Josephine nodded, knowing it was the right decision even as part of her wished he would stay. Their relationship was progressing at a pace that felt right to them both, careful, deliberate, with full awareness of the significance of each step forward. At the door, he turned back to her. "I'll see you Sunday, for Christmas services." "Yes, and Isaac." She hesitated, then spoke the words that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "I love you." The joy that transformed his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I love you too, Josephine, more than I have words to express." With one more gentle kiss, he departed into the cold December night, leaving Josephine standing in the doorway of her own home, her heart fuller than she had believed possible after all she had endured. The new year of 1882 arrived with a sense of possibility that Josephine hadn't felt in years. Her work at the Silver Strike began in January, initially 3 days each week as they had agreed. Isaac had converted a small room off the main house into an office, with a sturdy desk, filing cabinets, and a large ledger book where all the ranch's transactions were recorded. Josephine took to the work with surprising ease. Her natural attention to detail served her well in maintaining the ranch's accounts, and she found satisfaction in bringing order to the somewhat chaotic records Isaac had kept. By February, she had implemented a new filing system, reconciled several discrepancies in the books, and begun corresponding with suppliers and buyers on the ranch's behalf. "You're a natural at this," Isaac told her one afternoon as he reviewed the quarterly projections she had prepared. "I should have hired you months ago." Josephine smiled, pleased by the professional approval. "It's interesting work. I never thought I'd find satisfaction in ledgers and invoices, but there's something satisfying about making everything balance." Their professional relationship developed its own rhythm, distinct from their personal connection. At the ranch, Isaac was the boss, decisive, focused on the operation, respectful of Josephine's expertise but clearly in charge. In town, during their evenings together at her cottage or at church on Sundays, he was her suitor, attentive, gentle, increasingly open about his hopes for their shared future. By March, Josephine was working at the ranch 4 days a week, returning to town each evening to her cottage. The arrangement worked well, allowing her independence while deepening her involvement with Silver Strike and its operations. Spring brought new activity to the ranch calving season, the arrival of additional hands for the expanded operation, preparations for the summer cattle drive to the railhead. Josephine found herself increasingly drawn into the daily life of the ranch, getting to know the workers and their families, understanding the rhythms of the seasons that governed their lives. One warm April evening, Isaac invited her to ride with him to a hilltop overlooking the ranch. They sat on a blanket spread on the ground, watching as the setting sun painted the valley in gold and shadow. Below them, cattle grazed peacefully in green pastures, smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney, and workers moved about completing the day's final chores. "I never tire of this view," Isaac said, his arm around Josephine's shoulders. "Especially in spring when everything's green and new life is everywhere." Josephine leaned against him, content in the moment. "It's beautiful. I came to this spot the day I bought the land," he continued. "Stood here alone and tried to imagine what it could become." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "I had the vision, but I never imagined sharing it with someone who would understand it the way you do." The intensity of his gaze made Josephine's heart quicken. "What are you saying, Isaac?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I love you, Josephine Taylor, that these months with you have been the happiest of my life." He shifted to face her directly, taking both her hands in his. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. Sharing this land, this life with me." Though Josephine had begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Isaac, before you answer," he interrupted gently, "I want you to know that nothing would change about your position at the ranch if you say no. Your job is secure regardless of your answer, and if you need more time, I understand. There's no rush." The consideration behind his words, making sure she didn't feel pressured or dependent, confirmed what Josephine already knew in her heart. This man, who had first seen her at her most vulnerable and had consistently treated her with respect and care, was the partner she wanted for the rest of her life. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to be your wife." Joy broke across Isaac's face like dawn. He gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally parted, both were breathless and smiling. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and emptied its contents into his palm, a ring with a single sapphire set in silver. "It was my mother's. Rachel kept it all these years, waiting for this moment." As he slipped it onto her finger, Josephine felt tears well in her eyes. "It's perfect." They were married in June, when wildflowers dotted the rangeland and the days were long and golden. The ceremony took place on the Silver Strike, under an arch of roses and sage that the ranch hands had constructed near the creek. Nearly everyone from Chloride attended, along with ranchers and their families from miles around. Josephine wore a dress of ivory silk that she had designed and sewn herself, with Rachel's help for the fittings. It was simple but elegant, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs that echoed the wildflowers surrounding them. Isaac wore a new black suit, looking uncommonly formal but handsome, his face solemn until the moment Josephine appeared on Rachel's arm, then his expression transformed into one of such naked adoration that murmurs of approval rippled through the assembled guests. The preacher from Chloride's small church officiated, speaking of commitment, partnership, and the building of a life together. When it came time for their vows, Isaac took Josephine's hands in his voice steady and sure. "Josephine, I take you as my wife, promising to honor and cherish you all the days of my life. I vow to stand beside you as your partner, to respect your independence even as we build a shared life, to support your dreams as fervently as my own." His blue eyes held hers intently. "I promise to remember always that love is not possession, but freedom, the freedom to be fully yourself, knowing you are valued for exactly who you are." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks as she responded with her own vows. "Isaac, I take you as my husband, promising to honor and cherish you all the days of my life. I vow to stand beside you as your partner, to share in your vision for this land, to build with you a home of peace and joy." Her voice strengthened as she continued. "I promise to trust in your love, to believe in our future, and to remember always that together we are stronger than any mark or memory that tried to define us." The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, tables laden with food prepared by women from town and neighboring ranches, music from local musicians, dancing under stars that seemed to have been polished especially for the occasion. Josephine and Isaac moved through it all in a haze of happiness, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends and neighbors. Late in the evening they slipped away to the main house, which was now their shared home. Rachel had moved permanently to the boarding house in town, giving them privacy for their new life together. Josephine had decided to maintain her cottage as well, as a place for her dressmaking and occasional retreats to town. In the privacy of their bedroom, with moonlight spilling through the windows, Isaac approached his bride with characteristic gentleness. "Are you nervous?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Josephine considered the question honestly. After her experiences in captivity, she had feared that intimacy might always be tainted by those memories. Yet with Isaac, she felt only anticipation and trust. "No," she replied, "not with you." His smile was tender as he bent to kiss her. "We have all the time in the world. Tonight and all the nights to come." What followed was a revelation, gentle exploration, whispered words of love and reassurance, passion building slowly until Josephine found herself swept away by sensations she had never experienced before. Isaac was attentive to her responses, careful of her comfort, focused entirely on her pleasure before his own. When they finally came together completely, Josephine felt not the fear or shame she had dreaded, but a profound connection that brought tears to her eyes. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Josephine felt a sense of peace she had thought lost forever. "I love you," she whispered. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, more than I ever thought possible." As summer progressed into fall, Josephine and Isaac settled into the rhythms of married life on the Silver Strike. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, Isaac overseeing the practical operations, while Josephine handled the business affairs with increasing confidence and skill. In October, they traveled to Prescott for the Territorial Fair, where Silver Strike cattle won ribbons in several categories. The trip served as a delayed honeymoon, with 3 days in the territorial capital, enjoying concerts, exhibitions, and the luxury of the new hotel on the plaza. On their final evening there, as they prepared for the journey home the following day, Isaac noticed Josephine standing before the mirror, her fingers tracing the scar on her shoulder that was now a silvery mark rather than an angry wound. "Does it still pain you?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, Not physically, but sometimes I still feel it. Here, she touched her heart, like it's a part of me I can't escape. Isaac came to stand behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. It is a part of you, he acknowledged, but only a part. Like my war memories are part of me. They shaped us, but they don't define us. Josephine leaned back against his solid strength. I used to think the brand marked me as less than human, as property, but now I see it differently. How so? It marks a battle I survived, a war I won. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and direct. They tried to break me, to erase who I was, but they failed. I'm still here, still myself. Isaac's face reflected his pride in her. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Josephine Dawson. She smiled at the sound of her new name. Not strong, just stubborn, and fortunate enough to have found people who saw me, not my scars. He gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that still made her heart race after months of marriage. I see you, he murmured against her mouth. Every day I see you more clearly. And I fall in love with you all over again. They returned to the Silver Strike the following day, the ranch golden with autumn colors, cattle being moved to winter pastures, preparations underway for the cold months ahead. As the wagon crested the final hill, the valley spread before them, their home, their shared vision, their future. Josephine reached for Isaac's hand, a sudden certainty filling her heart. I have something to tell you, she said, her voice both nervous and joyful. Something I confirmed with the doctor in Prescott yesterday. Isaac glanced at her, curiosity in his eyes. What is it? Next spring, when the wildflowers return. Josephine placed their joined hands over her still flat stomach. We'll have a child of our own. The wagon came to an abrupt halt as Isaac stared at her in wonderment. A child, you're certain? Josephine nodded, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. The doctor says I'm about 2 months along. Our baby will arrive in early May. Isaac's whoop of joy echoed across the valley. He leaped from the wagon and came around to lift Josephine down, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently on her feet, mindful of her condition. A child, he repeated in awe. Our child. As they stood together on the hill overlooking their home, Josephine felt the final pieces of her healing click into place. The brand on her back would always be there, a reminder of dark days she had survived. But it was no longer the defining mark of her existence. She was Josephine Dawson, wife, future mother, rancher, businesswoman. A woman who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. A woman who had found love when she least expected it, with a man who saw beyond her scars to the person beneath. The mark on her skin was just that, a mark. It was the invisible marks she and Isaac had made on each other's hearts that truly defined them. And those marks, born of love rather than cruelty, would endure and strengthen with each passing season, each shared challenge, each moment of joy in the life they were building together on this wild, beautiful land. As Isaac gently helped her back into the wagon for the final leg of their journey home, Josephine looked toward the future with a heart full of hope. The road ahead would hold challenges. She knew the hardships of ranch life, the uncertainties of raising a child in this harsh territory, the ongoing work of healing old wounds. But she would face those challenges standing beside the man who had first told her that her brand didn't define her, and had then helped her discover who she truly was beneath the scars. Together, they drove down toward the Silver Strike, toward home, toward the next chapter of a story that had begun in darkness but would continue in light. A story of their own making, written not in the cruel marks of the past but in the choices and love of each new day.